Hey Squishies! Back again for take 57 of another vlog. This is Star vs. the Forces of Evil, Season 1, Episode 9, I think. Into the Wand and Pizza Thing. And I have had a ridiculous number of false starts on this video for a wide variety of reasons, but hopefully this time will be the time that I actually succeed in recording it. So the first segment here was a very plot-heavy one. The second one was more character and nonsense, which seems like a pattern that the season has been following in general. I don't think it was quite as pronounced in the first season, where there was, I think, a higher proportion of silly episodes. I mean, they're all silly, but ones that were just there to be silly. This one seems to be going more for that mix most of the time. I'm not super into the ongoing plot, but it is entertaining. Star is starting, I think, we've been hinting a lot this season that something is, and going back into last season with the Thanksgiving-ish episode that pretty clearly framed the Mewnins as colonists and the monsters as indigenous people who were displaced by them and vilified by them. We're kind of seeing more, all is not quite right with the Mewnins. That Hall of Tapestries, they were not nice people, Star's ancestors. Conquerors, practitioners of dark magic. The inscription for the tapestry of her mother that was about darkness haunting the victim of her mother's spell, which was Toffee. Not nice people at all. Which may be why there was a minimum age on entry, that they want to make sure that Star is ready to see that before she goes in, and she didn't feel ready. But that's the thing, like, when we shield children from the horrors of the past, I think very often we create an environment in which it becomes easier to deny them. It's always possible, but it becomes easier to deny those horrors ever happened. Because when I was very small and impressionable, I was taught that, X, Y, and Z, and those were lies to children, but I didn't know that. If you're not familiar with the concept, lies to children are, I'm sure I've talked about them in another video at some point, because they're a concept I'm fascinated with. But lies to children are a pedagogical concept, where you teach children things that aren't true deliberately to prepare them for things that are true. They're very heavily used in the teaching of science. You teach children things like weight is constant even when something changes shape. And then later you teach them, well, that's actually not true. Weight varies according to what, local gravity, but the mass is constant, except later, if they get into, relativity, then you can just, well, mass isn't quite constant in X, Y, and Z. And then later still, as they go on in learning of science, you teach them, well, but. And so basically, you start with by the time you get to the last of the well buts and the cutting edge of human knowledge, you realize that what you learned as a child was just blatantly false, but was deemed necessary to get you there. Sometimes this is relatively harmless, such as with the teaching of weight and mass and so on, although I have recently, there was some discussion of some, I'm on this alumni list for my high school, and some of the people who attended, went on to study, fairly advanced science, and there was a discussion between a few of them, a couple of chemists, a couple of physicists, about quantum mechanics and how the way it was taught at the undergrad level, where they used that same kind of approach of let's teach it more or less with here's the initial thing we thought, but then we realized this, but then we realized this, but then we realized this, actually makes it much harder to understand. And if you just start from the math and the basic principles of it and go from there, it's much easier to understand. If you have the math to understand it in the first place. Which is how it's retaught in graduate school that way. And they said that's actually much easier to follow. I have to take their word for it since, I definitely don't have the math to learn quantum mechanics at all. But that's still a relatively minor negative consequence. Sometimes the negative consequences for lies to children are much worse. Because, for example, we teach people in high school biology that there are two sexes and one is defined by having two X chromosomes and the other is defined by having an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. And as a result of that, you have grown adults who never learned anything past that particular lie to children, insisting that that is scientific fact, and actual scientists telling them that they're wrong get accused of being social justice warriors or whatever. The reality is more complex. And history, I think, is possibly the most dangerous place, where we tell the worst lies to children. Where we tell them that, for example, this country was founded by people seeking peace and freedom, when it was actually founded by people who didn't want to pay their taxes. It's more complicated than that. These so-called founding fathers get treated very hagiographically for children. And as a result, many people as adults never quite accept that, no, actually this country really was built by smugglers who didn't want to pay their taxes and slave owners who preached about the universal freedom of humanity while owning slaves. In other words, hypocrites, liars, thieves, selfish people, because that's who goes around founding countries, let's face it. Most European countries were found by mass murdering, killers. And that's kind of what we have with Mewni, Mewni is this, traditional fairy tale kingdom. And what is a kingdom? It's some marauding bandit got a big enough band to make a big enough fortress to declare himself king, or herself queen, in the case of Mewni, it seems. And it was less about band size than magical power, but the point remains. And I think we would be better off being a little more honest with kids so that they weren't so prone to denial as adults. Just throwing that out there. That said, obviously the main point of the episode was that the finger is now in Star's possession. It's in her closet, which, again, I keep coming back to the Oh, I'm blanking on his name. Koshev the Undying. Um, and the legend with him putting his life in his finger so that he could not be killed. And there was a mention of the immortal monster here. So I think, Toffee will return and probably is through the finger watching right now. But I also think we're complicating things a little. I think we might be getting into, like, Toffee is villainous, but he's motivated by vengeance for real crimes committed by the Mewnins. And by Star's family in particular. And you might say, well, like, I'm hoping they go this way, where it's like, well, it's unfair that Star has to deal with the consequences of her parents, that, she has to inherit these guilt for these generational crimes. That's not normally how we think of guilt as working, but the monsters have been marginalized and oppressed by the Mewnins for generations. We're seeing that with, what's-his-face? Buffrog. His children are hungry and their father is frequently absent because of Star's family's crimes. So if the consequences are generational, maybe the responsibility is too. And that's more important than guilt anyway, is who's got the responsibility, which typically is who has the power. Because if you've got the power to fix it, then you've got the responsibility too. That's how it works. And then Pizza Thing. Because that's what this show does, is it gives us all that kind of crap and then throws some nonsense at us. Pizza Thing was just more silliness. Marco and Ponyhead continuing to have their relationship. Like, they kind of keep doing this where the two of them don't like each other and don't get along and don't respect each other, and then learn to begrudgingly respect each other and the fact that they both care about Star and that they have to coexist and it's not so bad, and then right back to that same, well, next time we do an episode focused on the two of them. Which on the one hand, yeah, that kind of is how it often works with people, that we do have to keep learning the same lessons over and over and over and over again until they stick. But on the other hand, it's also kind of repetitive. And there really wasn't much to this episode, half episode, whatever you want to call it, segment. It was just kind of there. Didn't really give much to engage with, I don't think. Yeah. So I guess that's about it. Hope y'all enjoyed that. Don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe. Check out my Patreon for early access to vlogs, essays, gaming videos, and more. And I will see you all next time. Bye!